Free agency is almost upon us, and with transactions comes the need to understand the salary cap. Andre Perrotta joins us today to break down where the Bengals stand heading into 2022.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow, as always, with your host, James Rapien, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or that follow button on your audio platform of choice to get us delivered to your eyes and ears first thing every day, and we appreciate it when you make us your first listen. Today, as I mentioned, we're joined by Andre Perrotta. Andre, the resident Bengals cap expert. And I do my best. James does his best, but nobody does it quite like Andre. And we're starting to see the Bengals version of salary cap accounting through various sources. First of those being Mike Petraglia posting the state of the Bengals salary cap. And as always, there's a little bit of a disconnect between how the Bengals are doing their cap accounting and how the rest of the world is doing their cap accounting at this time of year. And Andre, let's just start with the high level. Thanks for giving us a little bit of time today. After franchise tagging Jesse Bates and looking ahead to the obvious or imminent expenditures against the cap, which is exclusive rights free agents, and some of those will be offset by the offseason top 51 rule, which we might want to explain as well, and the restricted free agent tender probably coming for Stanley Morgan. Where do the Bengals stand as free agency opens, or the tampering period, I should say, opens next Monday?
So first, thanks for having me on again, Jake and James. Always appreciate you having me on, inviting me on to talk about the cap and free agency. So keep up the great work in general. You guys do a great job. But yeah, so a couple things. The NFL officially released the unadjusted cap that applies to every team league-wide yesterday. That was at $208.2 million, so $208,200,000. That's every team's unadjusted cap. Then you adjust that by the amount that you roll over. I'm sure we'll talk about the rollover matters later on. The Bengals rolled over a little bit more than $5 million last year, but then there were some actually negative adjustments that the Bengals had, primarily from guys who earned bonuses in the form of per game roster bonuses that were considered at the start of the year not likely to be earned. So there's always an adjustment that the league office does at the end of every year. That the Bengals actually had a negative adjustment of about $400,000 for that. So when you add that to the rollover amount, it's a little under $5 million they rolled over. So essentially they're working with an adjusted cap of about $213 million or so. If you add that just under $5 rollover plus adjustment, and you add that to the 208.2. So they're sitting at about 213. Their current cap commitments, you mentioned Mike Petraglia's article today. If you include the Jesse Bates franchise tag, which actually does count against the cap the minute it's issued to the player, regardless if the player signs it or not, it's just the minute you issue it, it counts against the cap. I have them around 40 million or so in cap space. That's before roughly 40 million, about 39, but that's before you mention some of the internal matters that they'll probably clean up in this next week before we actually get to the tampering period of next Monday. Those are really the exclusive rights guys that you mentioned, guys like Clay Johnston. Jalen Davis was an exclusive rights player, but Jalen Davis actually already re-signed. And not to get too in the weeds here, but I will commend the Bengals here, and hopefully this is a good. This portends well for what they'll do in the offseason. For Jalen Davis, they could have signed him to an exclusive rights deal, but he was in a unique situation. He actually already had 4 credited seasons, so his base salary that was due to him would have been upwards of over $1 million. But the Bengals actually utilized what's called a veteran salary benefit deal for him. So they gave him the same amount of cash, but his cap hit is now lowered to $895. So it's only a savings of $140,000 against the cap, but the Bengals showed some shrewdness, if you will, in applying some unique principles of the CBA to get a lower cap hit. The reason that I bring that up is if they're trying to minimize the cap hits to squeeze a lot of these players in to maximize their Super Bowl window now, which played out this past season, I think that portends well, potentially, to maybe go cash over cap, kind of like how they did in 2020. So the exact amounts, you mentioned the way they internally account for their spending. They have a lot of room to work with, and we can, it's roughly about 40 million. But the team likes to say, well, it gets whittled down very quickly with the exclusive rights guys, the RFA guys, which really there are two restricted free agents. There's Fred Johnson and Stanley Morgan. I don't think Fred Johnson's going to get tendered. He was a healthy scratch for a lot of the season. Mm-hmm. He was not on the active roster, even though I like Fred Johnson as a player. So that just means if they don't tender him, he'll be an unrestricted free agent, free to sign elsewhere. But I think Stanley Morgan is probably the only RFA who will get tendered. And the question will be, do they tender him at the second round tender, which is almost $4 million, just under 4, or do they tender him at the original round draft level, which he was an undrafted pick anyway, but it's the second tier. So it's just about 2.4 million. So yeah, those get whittled down, but the reality is every team has exclusive rights free agents. Every team has restricted rights free agents. So it's just funny how the reports are, well, they have to account for that. Of course they have to account for that, but there are ways to maneuver the cap. And we hope they maneuver it in a way that really, really obviously address areas of critical need, the offensive line, and really supplement the other areas of the roster that need to be supplemented.
So when you look at their cap and what they have, you said around 40 million, and we'll just round up just to make it, whether it's 39 or 40, just to make it cleaner. They could part ways with Trey Waynes. Breaking news, the Bengals are going to do that. So if you want to give me credit for breaking that, go ahead or not. I'm kidding, of course, but everybody knows that they'll free up around close to 11, right, Andre? Yep. And then Trey Hopkins, it seems like it's leaning that way towards them parting ways with him. So we're looking at potentially opening up the tampering period, essentially with around 55 million in cap space. Is that fair?
Yeah, if they make those two cuts, which I would imagine they do, I think Trey would probably be let go after they secure a center. And there are some reports out there about some interest in Jensen and Bozeman, potentially some of the other centers. It's a pretty deep centers market, even after you get to the top two guys there, however you want to order them. But yeah, that's a good estimate. But and I guess we'll talk about this too. What I've always done, at least since I've been following the cap since about 2011, since the lockout from the 2011 season, I really track their spending, their cash spending, more so than their cap. And I don't know if we want to get into this now, but I kind of get the same vibes for this offseason that's approaching, similar to how the 2020 offseason, we approached that 2 years ago before COVID, actually right during when COVID started, really in March of 2020. And really, the financial uncertainties of the NFL were not known. Nobody knew that you would be playing in front of empty stadiums. And the Bengals, with that financial uncertainty due to COVID, really went out and spent a lot in 2020. With the lower cap, the cap in 2020 was 198.2 million. The cap this year is 10 million over that. And remember, 2020, we also had a franchise player, was AJ Green. AJ Green was it counted for 18.1 million on that cap. So it's a higher percentage. Even on a smaller cap than the Jesse Bates franchise tag. And in that season, so you mentioned, James, about 56 million or so in cap space. But I look at the cash commitments, and right now, if you include the Jesse Bates franchise tag into their cash commitment column, and to be clear, if they would have signed Bates to an extension, that would have entailed a lot of upfront cash. They would have given him a decent bonus. They would have probably structured it to include a roster bonus that's due a couple days after signing. So that may take away, that may be saved in their cash reserves, essentially, for their use potentially in free agency, which is, at least I hope it is, because when I look at their current cash spending, and then I look at it just merely from a process of elimination, they can't touch the 2020 class yet. Burrow, T. Higgins, Logan Wilson, those guys, you can't touch them. They've only been in the year 2 years. The rule is you have to spend 3 years in the league as a drafted player. They can't touch, obviously, the 2021 class. So you have to spend it somewhere. So where's it going to be spent? Right now, they're at 133, again, including the Bates tag in cash commitments. Then you can add those smaller pieces. Fine. You want to add $2.5 million for the restricted free agent tender for Stanley Morgan? Go ahead. You want to add the million or so hits, give or take, for the exclusive rights guys? Sure. But you're still dealing with a lot of available cash to spend. And if they do keep in line with their recent spending, again, not cap hits, their cash spending, they've gone cash over cap in each of the last 4 years. So the unadjusted cap is 208 million, 0.2. So if they spend right at that amount, 208 million, they're currently at 133. That delta there is a huge amount that's going to be spent. And if you also remember, in that 2020 season, they had to account for a huge signing bonus to number 1 overall pick Joe Burrow. That signing bonus of that year was almost 25 million. The signing bonus for pick 31, assuming they don't even trade out of that, is going to be about maybe 6.5, 7 million. And then, of course, the cap space needed to sign the rookies is less than 3 million total because of the roster displacement we'll talk about. So to answer your question, and apologies for the long-winded answer, they have a lot of cap flexibility, but they also have a lot of cash to spend because their current cash commitments are below $140 million. And again, if we're to believe the Petralia article and some other statements made by the team saying we're going to spend to the cap, I take that to mean cash spend, then I think, we're going to see some signings. Now, the caliber of those signings remain to be seen, but I don't anticipate the Bengals sitting on their hands here. Yes, they have their internal UFAs to re-sign, potentially Uzama, BJ Hill potentially, but really they're looking to upgrade the offensive line. I anticipate several signings along the offensive line amongst external free agents. Potentially Quentin Spain can be brought back too if they miss out on some of the other younger guys, but they have a lot of cash to spend, James. And I really think just by process of elimination, where are they going to spend it? They have to spend it, the majority of it, on the offensive line.
We'll continue our conversation with Andre next, which includes how Aaron Rodgers' new deal could impact Joe Burrow's future and more. But first, I have to tell you about the number 1 protein bar on the planet. That's right. It's that time of the show, Built Bar time, where they're high in protein, low in sugar, low in calories, perfect for you. And look, I keep them right here on my desk. I eat one a day at least, and then I replace them and make sure I got another one here on the desk anytime, just in case, I get hungry while I'm talking to Jake, or today, Jake and Andre. So if you want to get the number 1 protein bar on the planet that's covered in 100% chocolate, you can do so right now at built.com, and you're going to get 15% off with promo code LOCKED15. So whether you're looking for a midday protein punch or maybe just a post-workout protein fix, you can get it at built.com, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off.
Having some technical issues with our microphone. Thanks, James, for taking care of that. And Andre for the detailed breakdown there about how the cash and cap spend will play out. And what's interesting is the cash spend thing. I hadn't really considered the fact that they're actually saving cash with Jessie Bates. And I think that's a really good point. My initial thought, and you may have heard me say this on the show when the franchise tag became official, is that like AJ Green's franchise tag, that removed cap flexibility from the Cincinnati Bengals. But conversely, in this case, you're right. It saves them a bunch of cash this year. So say that they're allocating $13 million in cash spend to Jessie Bates, give or take. That's probably a lot less than the, say, $25 million that they might have been paying Jessie Bates this year. And that's just a ballpark number. But you've been tracking this for some time now, Andre, and the last couple of years, the Bengals have spent over the cap in cash. If that's the case this year, and the number I've been throwing around before the Jessie Bates expenditure was about $100 million, now you're saying that, probably at least in the 70 million range after Jessie Bates is roughly what it sounds like. Say that you take away, like you said, the 6.5 or so for the exclusive right guys and the restricted free agent likely tender and Stanley Morgan. That's still a lot of money to spend. And when you spend that much cash in a year, inadvertently, obviously year 1 cap hits won't be the same as the annual average value, won't be the same as the cash spend that the Bengals outlay this year. But I do wonder if we'll see any change in the way the Bengals do business. The way they do business is they roll over money and they set up their contracts in such a way that they will not be restructured. There are no planned restructures like we just saw Dallas do with Dak Prescott on Wednesday. Do you think that there will be any change in modus operandi for the way this front office does contracts this year with 2 years left on Joe Burrow's rookie deal, seeing especially Aaron Rodgers potentially cashing it at $50 million per year, knowing what they will be allocating to Joe Burrow in the future?
It's a good question, and it remains to be seen. I wish I had a crystal ball, but in terms of them changing their structure, which I think we all know, or those who follow the cap know, that their preferred structure for their major contracts is really not guaranteeing anything outside of the signing bonus, not paper guarantee, not offering the true guarantees in the contract. Now, just because it's not truly guaranteed doesn't mean it's not effectively guaranteed, but it's the way the contract is structured. And you can take a Trey Waynes example. For like, Trey Waynes only had the true guarantee in his deal of the $15 million signing bonus, but they're not going to cut the guy after 1 year, even though he didn't play his first year. And so really he got paid for 2 years, even though the second year of his contract had no guaranteed earnings whatsoever. So that's the argument the Bengals made. To your question, Jake, will they change that? The fact that they didn't extend Jesse Bates or haven't reached an agreement yet and had to tag him, it means to me his agent is known as, he represents a lot of safeties, and I'm sure he was banging the table for guarantees. And the fact that they had to tag him, to me, means that no, they're not changing their structure with regard specifically to not offering the guarantees outside the bonus. They're at least not changing it for now. But the Bengals aren't alone there. They're in the vast minority of NFL clubs. They're joined by the Packers and the Steelers, who typically don't offer the guarantees outside the bonus. But if you get a player with enough leverage, Joe Burrow will certainly qualify next year. They will have to change their structure. They will have to offer guarantees outside of the signing bonus. TJ Watt had enough leverage to get Pittsburgh to change their contract structure and offer guarantees into subsequent years in the deal. Now, there was a report that TJ Watt at a certain point did say to his agent, let me go to Rooney's office and sign the deal. Enough is enough. But they did get to change TJ and his camp got the Steelers to change the way that they structure their deals. And of course, Green Bay is the other sister franchise, if you will, in terms of similar structures. But of course, Aaron Rodgers. This one, though, the terms of this one may be different because he's contemplating retirement, not this year, obviously, but in future years. So I'm not sure about the guarantees, although they will have some. But even in his prior contracts that he signed prior to this extension, that had guarantees outside the signing bonus. So unfortunately, I don't think it will change this year, because I think the Bates lack of a long-term extension is a pretty good indicator that they're not going to change. And I don't think they're going to change it for any guy on the free agent market, right? Even the top, like Taron Armstead, he's probably not going to be on their radar anyway because he's going to be the top tier tackle. But even a guy like him, multiple Pro Bowl guy, comes from another team, he won't have the leverage to get them to change the way they operate in terms of structuring those types of deals. But that being said, the Bengals should be commended in a way because they don't find themselves ever in cap hell. They don't have to do these restructures, but at the same time, there is no reward at the end of the season for having like the most pristine cap management. You want to have it, great. You want to never put your club in a position to have to do that stuff, but you also want to maximize the roster. You want to win Super Bowls, and the Bengals got a taste of being in one and being within 85 seconds of winning one. So hopefully they do change in that regard, because it does help to attract higher caliber players to the team. And Joe Burrow, frankly, is going to get them to change anyway, and he'll sign his extension next offseason when he's eligible for the first time to sign one.
I want to ask you about Joe Burrow's extension, and we can dive into that. And you're right. I think it will happen next offseason. I want to ask you why that's beneficial. But before we do that, you mentioned attracting players and everything like that. And that's been a big topic outside of the structure. Is there anything that you've heard that you think, when analyzing how the Bengals structure things, that would be concerning to incoming free agents? Because I look at it from 1,000-foot view, and obviously there's Burrow, but I also watch free agent after free agent go to a team like Washington and flame out, or get cut 2 years in and struggle. And I can name a bunch of them, including former Bengals. I'm not going to do that. And it's not just Washington. But the Bengals, outside of Trey Waynes, have brought in all these guys, and they all seem to have success. And that, to me, would be as attractive as anything, because you know what I want? If I'm entering my prime, I want to go somewhere where I can really shine. Of course, you want money, but you want to shine and get credit where credit's due. And that would be really attractive to me. And so outside of structure, is there anything else that could prevent the Bengals from landing who they want and getting some of these, maybe not top free agents, but top targets, the guys that they view as top guys?
No, I mean, it's a great question. The structure is always going to be an impediment to those players. It's really the agents who are like, you got to guarantee this outside of year one. You got to guarantee an offseason, a second-year roster bonus. The Bengals will have a second-year roster bonus. They're just not going to guarantee it. But the reality is, again, to your point, James, they still have been able to attract and sign very valuable free agents, ascending players, guys that are coming off their rookie deal, like Cheeto Awuzie. They gave him a good signing bonus, but it wasn't a back-breaking deal. It was 3 years for 22 and change, so a little over $7 per year. And that structure fit well for an ascending player. Obviously, you're not going to break the bank with a guy like Cheeto, but the surplus value that he's providing on that deal. Trey Hendrickson may have been the best signing, but I think Cheeto Awuzie, for the high value position he plays, Hendrickson plays a high value position too. But Cheeto's contract has got to be looked at as one of the most valuable contracts, not just in last year's free agent signing, but in the entire NFL. Like that's not hyperbole for me. It's just an incredibly valuable contract. So the Bengals should be commended for that. I mean, they have been able to target guys and land guys on those mid-sized deals, because really the reality is the NFL, the way that the CBA works, you're paying top. Look at the Chiefs roster, for example. You're paying a bunch of top-end guys. They just tagged Orlando Brown, but you're paying like a Joe Tooney, Patrick Mahomes. They're going to extend Tyreek Hill. You're paying and Travis Kelce's up there. You're paying like 5 or 6 really high-end guys, and then you're feeding the rest of your roster with rookie players, minimum salary guys, and not really this middle class. But the Bengals actually have found a good niche market, an underserved market of veteran NFL players that are kind of like the middle class, which has been slowly disappearing in the NFL. Guys like Von Bell. Von Bell's on a 3-year, $18 million deal, last year of his deal. He may be up for an extension, by the way, a smaller extension later in the summer. I could see that. It actually could lower his cap hit. They probably should have done that earlier to lower his cap hit now to give them more flexibility. But Von Bell, Cheeto Awuzie, those types of guys are really good. Mike Hilton, obviously, a 4-year deal. Mike Hilton's locked in for 3 more years for $18 million for those 3 years. Essentially, that's incredible value for a slot corner. I know Mike has some limitations, but he's a good team leader and he plays well. So to your point, James, are the high-end free agents, the top of their class, regardless of the position, are they going to likely sign a deal that doesn't have guarantees outside of year one, which is the Bengals' preferred structure? They're probably not. Because like you said, yes, it's important to come up and be considered a valuable contributor and to play it now for a perennial playoff, maybe Super Bowl caliber team in the Bengals. But guys coming off their rookie contracts that have been slotted for them, they want to get paid too. You got one bite at the apple, essentially, and these guys want to get paid. They'll debate, how good the teams are that they go to, of course, and Burrow does have a legitimate draw, and the Bengals now too. But guys want to get paid, and they want to get their fair market value. But you look at Trey Waynes' contract and even Trey Hendrickson, just because you still will find some high-end guys, Waynes, Hendrickson, Reeder, that will agree to the Bengals structure because they do know, yes, okay, it's not guaranteed, but the reality is, like Trey Waynes or Trey Hendrickson right now is going to likely see, I would say, all 4 years of his deal, the remaining 3 years, just based on the season he had now. Like, let's say, God forbid, Trey Hendrickson blows out his knee. God forbid, knock on wood, the first day of training camp. The Bengals aren't going to cut him this year, and the Bengals aren't going to cut him next year unless he totally can't play anymore. He's going to see 3 years of that deal based on how he played in year one, even though he has no more guaranteed money on his deal. So you can find some guys that will be amenable to the Bengals' preferred structure because they'll look at some guys and say, hey, okay, you're still going to get paid a lot. You have a high average per year value. You don't have the guarantees, but they know that's the way the Bengals do business. So if they're willing to sacrifice that, knowing that they'll play for likely what's going to be a contender and still get paid commensurate with their value, I think you'll still be able to find some guys. Will they be the top end guys? Probably not. But you can find contributors like a James Daniel and Austin Corbett and some of the other guys that have been rumored to be interested in maybe signing with the Bengals.
I think it's interesting because the Bengals have typically in the last couple of years gone after guys for the most part going into their second contract. And as you said, Andre, a lot of those guys are guys that are looking for those bigger paydays, those bigger guarantees, or they're the Larry Ogunjobis and the Hassan Reddicks of the world looking for 1-year prove-it deals. Jadeveon Clowney, I think, has done this a few times as well for another example.
Many times.
And you're also describing this evaporating middle class, this disappearing middle class of veteran players. And that makes me think of guys like Andrew Norwell.
Yeah, there
who
you go.
are a little bit later in their careers, may not command as much guaranteed money, but may still have some gas left in the tank and be good fits. So one of those two things has to give, right? The Bengals either need to start looking at third contracts or later career guys, or maybe offer up a little bit more in the way of guarantees. And you and I also got into it a little bit when you were pointing out that the Bengals have started to do a little bit more in the way of guarantees, pointing out some of these guys like Trey Hendrickson and DJ Reader for getting, $15 million signing bonuses, which I argued were not terribly impressive, and you argued are sizable. So there's certainly a middle ground there, and the Bengals just have to identify the right guys that are going to be the right fits and when they talk about putting the money together for these deals, because as you point out, it seems like the structure is not going to change too much. And it's something that we'll monitor with the early deals. But I think you make a really good point that the Jesse Bates deal is a pretty good indicator. I do want to talk about the Aaron Rodgers contract rumor. He actually said that there is no contract signed. He wants to do a deal that's friendly to the salary cap, but with the concurrent franchise tag for Devontae Adams, it looks like whatever they work out will leave Green Bay with enough flexibility to try to put together one last push with Aaron Rodgers at the helm in a weakened NFC with Russell Wilson's departure. Joe Burrow up for extension next year. A few different models for fully guaranteed at the time of signing versus the buyout kind of structure that Kansas City did with Patrick Mahomes. What are you thinking right now as far as these other QB mega deals and the direction of the salary cap and as far as managing Joe Burrow's cap number with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase that will also be up for big money? Look at the Mike Williams contract, $20 million a year, as T. Higgins rubbing his hands together, looking with dollar signs in his eyes toward his future. What do you think is in store for Joe Burrow's extension that probably comes down next year?
Yeah, I mean, you made the good point that Rodgers is, so the reported numbers, I think even Rappaport and Mike Garafolo reported 4 years, 200 million. So that's 50 APY or AAV. But then Rodgers himself tweeted out that those aren't the terms, or those aren't truly accurate. So who knows? We'll see soon enough what they end up being. So right now, Dak is at 40 million. This is the top three quarterbacks on an AAV, from an AAV perspective, is Dak at 40 million. Josh Allen, I think, is at 43. And then Patrick Mahomes is at 45. The Mahomes structure is something to monitor because he does have the rolling guarantees. And I could see that the Bengals would probably do that. Like, in other words, they're called vesting guarantees. So if he's on the roster, let's say he signs his deal in, sometime in 2023, a year from now, it's probably going to be next summer, right before camp. And then, so he'll have a huge signing bonus. And then let's say his second contract year of the extension will be 2024. They'll probably do rolling guarantees with a year in advance. So like if he's on the roster the first day of the league year of the 2024 league year, his base salary and potentially an offseason roster bonus for 2025 will vest and fully guarantee. So they may adopt that from Patrick Mahomes, although Mahomes only had a $20 million signing bonus. I do think and I mentioned earlier, I do think that Burrow has the leverage and the Bengals are wise enough to make the exception, to change their structure, to land the franchise player. I mean, he's even more of a franchise guy than Carson Palmer was in 2005. And remember, the Bengals extended Carson Palmer in 2005, at the end of the regular season from after his third year, which really was Palmer's second year playing. Because remember, Carson Palmer didn't take any snaps in 2003, his rookie year. John Kidna played. And then Palmer started in 2004 and he was 8-8. And then 2005, they went 11-5, won the North. We all know what happened in the wildcard game, but Carson signed his extension before that wildcard game. So I'm not saying Burrow's going to sign his extension at the end of the regular season when he's eligible, but he will sign it next offseason because the Bengals have shown when they have a franchise guy, they're going to extend him. They did that with Palmer, but Burrow is an Ohio kid. He's right down the road in Athens. They're going to extend him. That structure is going to change. They're going to offer guarantees outside the signing bonus, but I would not be surprised to see a very large signing bonus given to Joe Burrow. It was reported that Rodgers got an $80 million bonus. We'll see if that's true, but I honestly could see that for Joe Burrow. I mean, that's the Bengals writing an $80 million check. But again, you you can have a signing bonus that's earnable at the time of signing. Obviously, that's the true guarantee. But then you can structure the contract where you pay out that bonus in different installments. So they can, let's say it's $100 million. They could cut him a $25 million check right at signing, and then pay him, $25 million when the season starts, $25 million at the end of the season, then $25 million after. But that all counts as a signing bonus and is prorated for cap accounting purposes. But the reason I think that they'll go on the larger signing bonus side is because, again, I think they will change their structure, but I don't think they want to change it too much. The Bengals, they like to operate the way they operate, right? So by giving him a large signing bonus up front, that may, let's say it's a 10-year, $500 million contract. That's 50 per. Let's say they give him a $100 million signing bonus. Well, that's already, 20%, $100 million out of $500 million. That's 20% of the guarantee. And so that's usually on these deals, you want about, 50 to 60% of guaranteed, at least for quarterbacks, if not higher. So that's a huge chunk of the guarantee that they could wipe out just with a large signing bonus. I would not also be surprised if in Burrow's deal, I'll tweet out some proposals probably later this year, as we get closer to his extension a year from now, as we approach the summer. But I would not be surprised if there are what are called guaranteed option bonuses in future years, like in years 2 and 3, kind of like how the Browns did with Myles Garrett. The option bonus is just that, okay, you get the player the cash in the offseason like a roster bonus, but if you fully guarantee it, an option bonus at the time of signing, you can prorate that from the option year over the remaining years of the contract. So especially if it's like a longer term deal, remember, if it's a 10-year deal, you can only prorate the bonuses out a maximum of 5 years. So you don't get that proration benefit. You can't prorate it out to the entire year of the contract, all the years. It's capped at 5. But if you do have an option bonus structure, then you can prorate those out from the year of the option bonus over the remaining years if you have a couple option bonuses in there. That gets his cash in the offseason. That's good cash flow. You probably will have some vesting and rolling guarantees like the Mahomes deal, but I think you're going to see a larger signing bonus than Mahomes got, who only got a $20 million bonus. And I think the AAV is going to be pushing, if not at 50 million. But bear in mind, Burrow's reps may want him to sign not that long of an extension because the cap is going to explode. You have all these new TV contracts that are going to start to hit the cap and factor into the all revenues of the league. You have the gambling revenues that are coming in. The Sunday ticket package is expiring with DirecTV. That's going to be that they're shopping that. So that's going to be added to the pot. So the cap we're over COVID, hopefully. So the cap is set to explode. So from Burrow's perspective, he may not want to do a 10-year deal because guess what? Who knows what, the 2023 or, a couple years draft classes have. I don't know the quarterbacks in college that are freshmen and sophomores now, but 5 years from now, 50 million may not, that may be middle of the road. I mean, that's pushing it, but that may not be at the top tier of the quarterback market. So his reps may be pushing for a shorter term deal, but I think the Bengals are going to want to lock him in like they did with Palmer. I think Palmer signed a 9-year extension. Mahomes got 10 years. I think the Bengals are going to want to do that longer term extension. And then you can finesse the cap by putting that option bonus structure in there, because then you can prorate that out over those remaining years once those option bonuses kick in. So
if they want to get that done, the long-term deal, and hopefully Katie's listening and Troy and Mike, and they should listen to Locked On Bengals. I don't know why they wouldn't. But anyways, if they are, that starts now to me, because if you want Joe Burrow to trust you for a decade, and I'm not saying they haven't done enough to earn his trust up to this point, but you have to show that you could protect him. And
I agree.
I'm sure he's sick of limping around, and he's not going to admit it. And I know he hasn't complained, and I haven't heard any whimpers of it or just whispers or anything of Joe Burrow being unhappy. But 10 years is a long time. Like if Locked On said, "Hey, Jake Liscow, let's lock in for 10 years," Jake would be like, I don't, we'll see, right? It's same thing with me. It's 10 years is a long time. And so there's got to be, the trust there. So going back to them spending this offseason, and Andre, you mentioned it multiple times throughout today's show, the offensive line, they have to address the offensive line, get it right. Because if they do that, if you're Burrow, what are you worried about? Like, they've done everything else. They've showed you that they would stand by their coach that you really, really like, and that they can build a defense, and that they can certainly give you the weapons that you need. If you find the offensive line, then sign you up for a 10-year deal. So I think that part of it is going to be a factor. And if they don't do it, of course he's going to want the money. And I'm not saying he wouldn't sign an extension, but it might be a 4-year extension or a 5-year extension, like you said, not a 10-year.
He may push for that. I think you raise valid points. I think Burrow's obviously going to sit there, and all these guys do. I mean, they're on social media. They may not post, but they watch the NFL Network, even if they're on vacation and working out. They'll see who signs next week. And you know, Joe Mixon was always like in the years before 2020 when the tide turned, when they actually went out and signed some guys externally. Joe Mixon would always he would post on Twitter, like he would see all these other teams signing guys, and the Bengals were signing like the likes of B.W. Webb and Kerry Wynn and John Miller. And Joe Mixon sitting there like, what are we doing here? And I think if you give that a 10x multiple, that's what Joe Burrow would be doing if you're sitting there like, hey, what's going on? But I do think, and I know I mentioned this earlier, and I may be pressed for time, but I will stress that heading into 2020, the cap was lower. They had a franchise tag player at a higher cap hit. And like to Jake's point earlier, I don't like the franchise tag. You're right. It's an immovable stick in the mud. You cannot maneuver that unless they agree to an extension. But if they agree to an extension with Bates in the summer, who needs the cap room at that point? You know, you need the cap room now. But the point is, it does offer them cash flexibility while at the same time, while also being true, there was no cap flexibility with the immovable stick in the mud that is the franchise tag. But to 2020, the Bengals, you know, if you go back and look at articles, you could see them. They're online. You can go search them. That say the Bengals are going to spend about $25 million on external free agents. And I always say, well, do they mean cash or cap? And who knows? But if you go back, remember DJ Reader, Trey Waynes, you had Von Bell, you had Josh Bynes, who's on a 1-year deal, LaShawn Sims, Mackenzie Alexander. Remember him? Those year one cap hits, they signed 8 external free agents that year. Their year one cap hits were $36.55 million combined out of those 8 cap hits. The year one cash spends for those guys, the cash that they gave each of those guys combined for the year one was $60 million, 60.55. So they went heavy cash over cap. And I really think you're going to see that starting next week. Because again, just look at their roster and look at the guys that they're prohibited from even touching their contracts. They're going to have to spend it. Now, are those guys the Lake and Tomlinson type deals, the Austin Corbett, or are they maybe like the Jermaine and Fetties and they maybe, you know, retain Eli Apple? It's going to remain to be seen. But I think if you look at that 2020 season, the 2 big contracts, you know, Jake, we had that little disagreement about what constitutes a sizable signing bonus. But if you go back, you look, the $15 million is a good signing bonus. They gave that to Waynes. They gave Reader $10 million, but then gave him a quick roster bonus of $6 million. So it was effectively $16 million. I think you're going to see those 2 bigger type O-line signings. And then you're going to have a couple of the middle tier guys like the Mackenzie Alexander, 1 year, $4 million. That may be a corner. Von Bell, 3 year, $16 million. That may be an interior defensive lineman, a 3-tech. Lower end 3-tech. It's not a really deep free agent class at 3-tech. So the point is, I really think this is going to take the shape of 2020. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and I'm going to be scratching my head to James' point and thinking about it from Burrow's perspective. Like, what are we doing here, guys? We need to spend. But I really think that's how it's going to play out. If you just look how they've historically spent in cash, they've spent up to the cap, if not over it. And really, they're willing to go cash over cap at least in year one for these guys, like they did in 2020. So I really think you're going to see a couple O-linemen that really signify some significant upgrades on the O-line.
And I think we also saw this in 2021 to probably a different degree because you're not talking about 2021, but there were significant year one cash expenditures in 2021 as well. And as you pointed out, they continue to overspend the cap in cash. And to do that this year, they have a lot of ground to make up, especially if we're talking about their adjusted number, $213 million. They have about $70 to $80 million of cash to spend on free agents, and between their own guys, the Quentin Spains, the Larry Ogunjobis, the Eli Apple, CJ Uzamas, BJ Hills of the world, and external guys to address their biggest need on the offensive line, you would expect that you could get a lot done with that much money. And to further your point, if you go back to 2020, you talked about they roughly, correct me if I'm wrong here, they roughly doubled their year one cap spend and cash spend. Is that correct? Roughly doubled?
With respect to what doubled from what?
In 2020, their cash spend on year one free agent acquisitions was roughly double the cap spend. This year, you're looking at them
almost
spending
2 to 1. Not quite 2 to 1, but it was almost 2 to 1. You're right.
They have about $40 million to $45 million in cap space after cutting Trey Waynes, and if they cut Trey Hopkins, including Jesse Bates franchise tag, including the exclusive rights guys and the restricted guys. That means you're looking at a $80 to $90 million cash spend, which gets you pretty close to that $100 million that I've talked about on this show before that includes the 13 million for Jesse Bates. So a lot of money to be spent for these Cincinnati Bengals this free agency period, and a lot of cap flexibility, quite frankly, despite what they may be telling reporters and what they've told reporters really for the last few years. They've ended up spending more against the cap and in cash than
Correct.
expected after the initials came out. The initial
That's
numbers
true.
came out in each of those years. Andre, really appreciate the time. Looks like you want to throw in one more point before we
Yeah,
let
well,
you
to
go.
your point about creating the cap space, and this is something that I tweeted out a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to tweet it out again soon as we approach the tampering period. There's one thing they could really do to and it's a simple. So the Bengals don't have automatic conversions in their contracts that almost every other team does. That allows a team to just go to the player and say, "Hey, we're converting a certain amount of your base salary into a signing bonus to prorate that bonus out and create some cap space." The Bengals have a $6 million year 2 roster bonus that's due to Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson's going to earn that bonus. He's not on the roster yet because they could cut him, but they're not going to cut him before the third day of the 2022 league year next week. And he's due to earn $6 million. The Bengals could easily create $4 million in cap space by just saying, "Hey, Trey, we're going to pay you that same amount. It's just going to be treated as a signing bonus instead of a roster bonus." You then prorate that. Instead of taking that $6 million cap hit for the roster bonus that's allocated to 2022, now you just spread it out over the remaining 3 years of Trey's deal. You don't even have to add a dummy void year. You just take 2. So instead of a $6 million roster bonus, it counts as a $2 million. Trey still gets his $6 million, but the Bengals would earn $4 million in cap space. And it's really something that doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't even really cost Trey anything, although there's some forfeitable language issues that he would have to work out with his agent, but his agent wouldn't have any issue with it because he gets paid the same. It's just something that they could and really should do. Yeah. And like the Reef void year that they did last year, which was totally unprecedented, I really wish they would do that because it's such a simple maneuver. Just make that $6 million roster bonus into a signing bonus. You create $4 million of cap space for 2022. Yes, you're adding on the added $2 million of dead money each of those next 2 years. But like I said at the beginning, Trey Hendrickson is likely going to see out the rest of his contract based on how he played in year 1. So those $2 million in added dead money to me in each of the next 2 seasons are worth the creation of $4 million in cap space. It's such an easy decision. I know you mentioned Katie and Troy. I hope they're all huddled up and finalizing their free agency plans. But if they happen to be listening, they know it too, because if they did the Jalen Davis veteran salary benefit deal to create $140,000 worth of cap room when they didn't have to do it that way, I know they can create $4 million by just changing that roster bonus into a signing bonus. It's a simple maneuver, and I hope they do it. I'll be surprised if they do, but here's to hope that they do. They don't need that $4 million in cap space, but it would show me it would be a good sign to say, hey, we're really looking to maximize our cap space here.
More money for JC Jackson. That's all. Go ahead.
There you go.
Incidentally, that's the same example that I use because that is a contract with which they have the greatest flexibility to do a restructure if they saw fit.
Right. But you're not even converting his base salary. You're not even touching Trey Hendrickson's base. Yep. You're just saying, let's just remodify this roster bonus into a signing bonus. You create $4 million cap space. Yes, you're adding the dead money, but to me, it's such a negligible cost for the added benefit. It just makes too much sense not to do it.
That would be the case for any restructured salary or roster bonus to signing bonus. Those become potential dead hits in future years if the players don't see the life of the contract. But the Bengals don't do restructures anyway. So maybe they do, maybe they don't. If they do, it's a sign that something has changed. The Bengals typically don't do restructures. And even if they don't, the bottom line is there's a lot of money to spend. And we'll see how they spend it in the near future. Tomorrow, we're going to be joined by Jeff Hobson, who's very familiar with the team, may have some insight on how they plan to spend this money. Andre, thanks again for the time. Go find Andre Perrotta on Twitter at Andre Perrotta 13 for all of your Bengals salary cap questions and expertise. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.